Hi, my name is Dr. Lisa Giacomo, and I'm here today with the CLT division of AECT. Our president and president-elect, Dr. Deepack Subramony and Dr. Sylvia Rogers, are going to give a presentation entitled How to Prepare a Winning CLT Proposal. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box as they arise, and we will address them at the end during the Q&A. Thanks, and thank you so much, Dr. Deepack and Dr. Sylvia, for joining us today and sharing your insights on what you're looking for this year in the AECT CLT proposals. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sylvia?
Thank you, Deepak. As Deepak said, I'm Sylvia Rogers, and I am a PhD in instructional design, and I work at the Harrison School of Pharmacy at Auburn University. And currently, I am the president-elect of Culture, Learning, and Technology.
And I'm Deepack Subramony. I am the coordinator of educational technology graduate programs at Kansas State University, and I'm the current president of CLT.
So basically, what we thought would be useful to our CLT members, as well as anybody who would be interested in being a CLT member and sending a proposal our way, is to give you some insight on the best way to prepare for a winning CLT proposal. And when we say a winning proposal, we mean the one with the best chance of being accepted. So as the president-elect, it is my job to be the conference planner. And last year and this year, we wanted to make sure that we know exactly what CLT is and that we let you know what we stand for. So we thought we'd start out a little bit with clarifying what the CLT is with a little brief history. And so Deepak, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Sylvia. Okay, so the CLT division is a relatively new division at AECT. We've only been a division since 2014. And before that, most of the membership of the division was involved in what was then known as Minorities in Media, or MIM. Minorities in Media was an interest group primarily composed of scholars of color who came together at a time when the field was extremely Eurocentric, patriarchal, and basically tone deaf to issues of diversity, inclusion, equity, and so on. And so in the 70s, when people of color first started getting involved in the field, they felt the need to set up a support and interest group to kind of support each other in a field that did not reflect who they were or what their needs and aspirations were. And that's how MIM got started. And MIM, served its purpose for a few decades before eventually morphing into a full-fledged division that we now know as CLT, the Culture, Learning, and Technology Division. And the C for culture is at the very beginning of the name for a very specific reason, because we are explicitly about culture, various dimensions, various ramifications of culture, which we will explain going forward in this webinar. But basically, culture is at the forefront of who we are, and culture needs to be at the forefront of any winning proposal that is accepted by our division.
So basically, this is what it's a very brief thumbnail of what Deepak had just said, and I think that really is what drives us forward. And we look here for the AECT 2020. Now, this is the overall conference theme. Of course, the conference will be November 2nd through November 7th. It really is great for us as the Cultural Learning and Technology Division, because this year's theme is towards culturally situated learning, design, and research. And so when you look at the overall theme, they really want to encourage members to strive for understanding of the culture of a group's organization, community, or society in the practice of learning design. And so they really go hand in hand with a lot of the things that we're interested in. And we as CLT are seeking proposals that explore the relationships between culture, learning, and technology in education, politics, economics, science, etc., and all other segments of society. We are looking for people that are explicitly addressing culture, learning, and technology. And specifically, we are looking for proposals that confront critical issues of power, hegemony, oppression, privilege, and intersectionality with respect to culture, learning, and technology. Deepak, would you like to add some more?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. So basically what Sylvia is trying to say is that simply including non-Western or non-white learners or stakeholders in your study may not be enough to qualify it to be a winning CLT proposal. Just because I conducted a study in India or somebody conducted a study in China or in the Caribbean does not necessarily make the study a CLT appropriate study unless the study actually asks questions related to these issues that Sylvia just laid out: power, hegemony, oppression, privilege, intersectionality. Unless these issues are, unless culture is basically critically examined in the study, your study may not be the best fit for CLT.
And I think it's also important, as it points out here, and as Deepak also mentioned here, explicitly addressing these things. So when you put forth your proposal and you think, well, I've got a great proposal for culture, learning, and technology, I think make sure that these things are explicitly addressed in your proposal. So it's not really enough that it's implied. We can only read what you give us, and we don't really necessarily know what's going on in your head or what specifically happened in your study. So when you have your, I think it's 1,000 words, you hear a cat meowing. I apologize. I tried to lock her out of the room, but she's very persistent. If in your 1,000 words, make sure that this is addressed, and so that we as conference proposal reviewers can see, what your thoughts are on this matter.
And if you're going to use any terms, you want to define them very clearly so we know what you're talking about. So if you're going to use terms like culture or like diversity or like inclusion, please, or like critical, please explain what you mean by that.
Another part that I think we want to make sure that's clear is that we also are very much encouraging proposals that address what could be traditionally underrepresented groups or populations: gender, race, socioeconomic status. And that's really actually not limited to gender, race, and socioeconomic status, because it could be an underrepresented group for a lot of reasons. It could be age, or it could be occupation, or any number of things. So I think there's so many ways that a proposal could be framed that it would be ideal for CLT. So when we said including relevance to gender, race, and socioeconomic status, it's not necessarily limited to that.
Absolutely. A lot of folks in the field today don't know or have forgotten the origins of our field. Our field started in the military/industrial sphere. It was a field that started with the idea of the so-called uniform learner. And in many cases, the learner wore a uniform. And whether he was a factory worker, I use the word he intentionally, or whether he was in the military. And so it took the field a very, very, very long time to move past that paradigm of the uniform male and mostly white Eurocentric learner, and to understand that the field was morally and ethically obligated to serve a wider audience of stakeholders. And that is also something that's kind of in the back of our consciousness as CLT people, that we do want to make our field, we want to make research and practice in our field more inclusive of the full diversity of humanity that is impacted by what we do.
And just, we can't really stress enough here where it says in the proposal narrative, proposal should highlight, bless you, where the proposal addresses this theme. So please be sure that you're explicit in all of these things. I just want to also kind of briefly go over all the kinds of sessions that AECT's increased the kinds of sessions. We've got the Inspire sessions, and This year, they're 45-minute sessions, sort of like a 45-minute interactive session, high energy, and the focus is on acquiring skills. And so if you went to any of those kind of sessions in Vegas most recently, you probably are familiar with this. And so this is going to be continued. And I hope that we get some great proposals on Inspire sessions. Concurrent sessions, we're of course familiar with those kinds of sessions. Those are a traditional conference session where people are presenting completed empirical research. And so we're interested in qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method research, or meta-analyses. So this is a very common type presentation. Roundtables and posters, another common presentation type, and that's sometimes roundtables and posters are practical applications. Sometimes roundtables and posters might be types of presentations where when you proposed, the study was not complete yet. And so you really couldn't give us the results. And so a lot of times roundtables and posters work for that because we want the concurrent sessions to focus on completed empirical research. And then, of course, there's always panel sessions, and those are always exciting sessions where typically you have some kind of experts that are talking about emerging cultural, ethical, and inclusion issues. We've done some great sessions with graduate student assembly, for instance, navigating graduate education or developing careers. And so really any kind of idea under what we've talked about with cultural learning and technology could be a great panel presentation. Make sure if you're presenting a panel presentation that you know that it's a panel. That way, we did have I think occasionally we noticed that people are talking about a panel situation, but for some reason they've submitted it to concurrent. So do your best when you're presenting that whatever type of presentation that you're aiming for, that you pick that one as opposed to putting it all in concurrent sessions.
Right. I mean, so when you go into the submission engine on AECT's website, I mean, there'll be a place where you can choose what kind of session you want it to be, and so make sure to choose appropriately. And also, I mean, so I was in Sylvia's position last year. I was the lead conference planner as president-elect at the time, and one thing that we did notice happening is that occasionally we might find a proposal for example, a concurrent session that we might feel that, based on what we read of the proposal, it might be better as a roundtable, or it might be better as an Inspire or as a panel, and vice versa. And it doesn't happen very often, but it does sometimes. And when it does, we actually do contact the lead author to ask if this is something that they would consider. So so do keep your kind of eyes open for any email that might come from us during the review process, asking if you might be willing and able to change the format of your presentation if we feel that would actually make it more meaningful. As I said, it doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen occasionally. So do keep your eyes and ears open for that, because we would need a timely response back, like yes or no or anything else.
Yes, and then that's very true, and I think that it's important to note. And then the other thing is there is one other type of session that is not part of this call, but will be coming down the line, and that's what they call the birds of a feather. And again, those started in Vegas last year, and it's sort of like a roundtable, but there's not a particular presentation that somebody's presenting. It's more like a facilitated discussion of some kind of topic, and those are not going to be coming through in this call. They'll be down the line. So if you're thinking that you have a great idea, maybe you don't want to make the presentation itself, but you're very interested in some kind of topic related to CLT, tuck that away or make a note of it. And so when it comes time to get the birds of a feathers out, that might be something that's really up your alley. And, there could be a table of people that are interested in discussing that with you. And so there is time for that as well. But that's not on this list because it's not part of the official division call. And so I just, and so right here, you see, if you have an idea for I like to call them BOFs because I just think that's a hilarious abbreviation. If you have an idea for a BOF, please look at our convention planners. Here, there's my email, and we also have our President-elect designate, and that is Dr. Christy Liu, and there's her email as well. And so please be sure and let us know. You can also send us messages on our Facebook page as well, and we would get those.
So Sylvia, can a lot of people asked me last year at Vegas if the BOF was basically some kind of an informal roundtable or a roundtable without a formal topic or there was a lot of confusion as to what a BOF was, I think, from lots of people. So, I mean, has there been any more clarity this year in terms of what exactly it is?
Yes, currently the conference planners are all discussing about the best ways to help facilitate a BOF. So last year, I think we had 3 tables and we had 3 ideas for topics. Now, as it turns out, I think we all combined into one discussion that was sort of a free-for-all, and that's fine. But I think a great example of a BOF, and it's not necessarily well, actually, here's a great example for a BOF that could be possible for a CLT. And it could be underrepresented learners in distance education. So maybe that's a topic that you're very interested in. So people would get together that were interested in that topic. And what they're going to try to do this year is have some kind of facilitator to help get the discussion going. So as opposed to a bunch of people at a table sort of looking at each other like, what are we supposed to do now? Make it to facilitate it a little bit more so that it's sort of like a round table, but again, there's not a particular person presenting their research or their ideas. So we're hoping that this is going to clarify the birds of a feather and make them more available and more interesting to people.
Sounds great.
Now we have the opportunity for questions and answers. I think I know that there's not a lot of people watching this particular webinar, but I know a question that's often come up and is when I'm reading proposals to review them is, we're the Culture, Learning, and Technology Division, and I'm going to go back to our notes about explicitly addressing culture, learning, and technology. So a lot of times people might say, well, maybe I have an issue that's culture and technology, or maybe culture and learning, but do I have to have all 3? And so I think that's a very common question. Deepak, would you like to answer that question?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I would see it this way. I would imagine that every single proposal submitted to AECT would include learning and technology, because I mean that's what we are about as a field. I mean that's what AECT is about as a field, and I think what sets the CLT division apart from the rest of AECT is that within the context of learning and technology, we are looking at it through a cultural lens, and so therefore it becomes incumbent, I believe, for any winning CLT proposal to essentially and naturally include all 3 of these.
Right, and I think we also define technology in the most broadest term possible, being that technology could be your computer or your iPad or your mobile device, but it is also tools and processes that are used together. So your technology may not be a webinar. It may be a process of design and templates that you use to create that process of design and implement that process design, as well as a view of critical issues of power, hegemony, or oppression, or privilege, or intersectionality with respect to culture, learning, and technology. Is that the case?
Yes, and I tell people, go back to AECT's own definition of the field. Go back to the 2007 definition, or go back to the definition that's currently being revised. and you will see that the field officially describes technology in the broadest terms possible. It describes technology not just as tools, but indeed as processes and as various other kinds of learning. And so basically, absolutely, so what Lisa is saying is absolutely right. We do look for technology to be addressed in our proposals, but we have that very, very broad concept of technology, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think that's really the key there. I think those were both great comments. Do either of you have commonly have questions that have been addressed to you about proposals or concerns about proposals that you want to set forth?
Lisa?
Because I think another question that has come up in the past also, I don't want to take away from anybody, is comparing cultures. So that's something that people sometimes like to do. So perhaps they have a study in X country and they're comparing it from a lens maybe from another country, or they're comparing it in some way. I'm not, it could be any kind of comparison. How would those kinds of proposals be met from CLT?
I think it goes back to the what we talked about in terms of that you have to have this critical lens when you're looking at issues of culture. Like, something uncritically, and that does not include the critical commentary, like, oh yeah, this is what's going on in China, this is what's going on in Turkey, this is what's going on here or there, or this is what's going on in the suburban neighborhood school, or this is what's going on in inner city school. There has to be some kind of a critical commentary that does address those issues of power and hegemony, oppression, intersectionality that we talked about.
Great. Because I know that those kinds of questions come up too.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Lisa, was I about to end? Were you about to make a comment? I think I saw you unmute. Oh, you weren't? Okay. So I think if we were to wrap everything up and give the best advice moving forward, the best advice to get the best chance to have your proposal accepted by Cultural Learning and Technology is right here. If you look at, the call, is exploring those relationships between cultural learning and technology, explicitly addressing it, and we're looking through the lens of these critical issues. And so those are the three, I guess, most important things if we think about it. And of course, other important things that make a winning proposal is that it flows, that you read it carefully so that all the terms are properly defined, that in your writing is good, and that you're not going to have a lot of typos or words that are not understandable, and that it's easy to understand exactly. So those kinds of things are kind of without saying so, but I think it's important to mention it because as we all are extraordinarily busy people, and sometimes, the studies occurred, we know what we want to propose, but it's that night before it's due. And we're all sitting there trying to get our proposals in, and we race through it. And sometimes as a reviewer, we read things, and even though it made all perfect sense in your head, when it came out, it doesn't flow very well and it's hard to understand. So take the time to make sure that you give it a good read, careful read, to make sure there's no issues like that as well.
Yeah, so there are these general guidelines that AECT has for appropriate quality of proposals, and so all those guidelines apply to CLT as well. In addition, we have our guidelines about the cultural lens that we just talked about.
Are there any other questions from the audience or from anybody else that would have a question?
And as you mentioned, Sylvia, I mean, you provided your contact information and Ju Hong's contact information. Like, if anybody has those questions, they can always follow up and they can always contact the two of you, right?
Absolutely. We would be very happy. Well, I don't want to speak for Christy, but I'm thinking that she would be happy to, that somebody was interested in getting some kind of clarification about a CLT proposal or whether it's appropriate for CLT. The other thing that happens in the proposal reviewing process is if, let's say, you submitted a proposal to D&D and they were reading it and they said, this is kind of more like a CLT proposal. There is a process which they can transfer it to us. Mm-hmm. And although I will tell you that it doesn't happen that often. Because a lot of times they don't always think of that and they just don't accept it.
Yes.
And just like we could say, and we're reading proposals. We could say, I think this is really probably more like an international division proposal. Mm-hmm. We can transfer it over and say, hey, guys over in international, I think this might be something that might be relevant to you, but it is really up to them to whether they accept it or not. So it's super important whether of course, we want you to propose to CLT, but as you look through the things and you're thinking, where's the best thing to propose? It's super important that you look at those definitions, not only of ours, but of the other ones, because if we see one that's really not us and we think we're sending it to D&D or RTD or whoever it is, mm-hmm. up to them whether they accept it or reject it. And typically, everybody gets way more proposals than they can accept.
Yes.
So a lot of times those kinds of transfers usually may or might not be accepted. So it's best to present or rather propose to the division that you think is best.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sylvia and Dr. Deepack, for sharing some guidance with us today on how to prepare a winning CLT proposal.
Thank you, and it was our pleasure and privilege to be here. And thank you, Lisa, for spearheading and organizing these wonderful webinars. That's just a great contribution that you're making to the division.
Yes, thank you very much for moderating.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day, and we look forward to getting your proposals, and we look forward to great proposals.
Thank you. Yes, we are very much looking forward to reading your proposals.